Her baby's breathing was fading in the blizzard's grip. She sang their people's final lullaby, believing it would be their last moment together. Then a shadow moved through the storm, a human hunter with a rifle approaching fast. What happened next defied every rule of their war-torn world. A mother knows her child is dying when the breathing changes. It becomes shallow, irregular, like a bird with a broken wing. Nara felt this in Milo's small body pressed against her chest. Each breath hitched, then broke, then started again, weaker than before. The cold wrapped around them like a living enemy. The twin moons hid behind thick clouds, offering no light tonight, only darkness and the constant howl of the wind. Snow stung her face, freezing on her copper skin until it glowed pale blue. Her fingers lost all feeling. She held Milo tighter anyway, her arms locked around him, a final shield against the storm. She remembered the stories her own mother had told her, of the song of passing stars, their people's final lullaby. It was meant to guide the spirit home when the body could no longer hold on. Her voice, rough with cold and grief, began the first notes. She felt the vibration in her throat more than she heard it. The wind stole the sound as soon as it left her lips. Each breath she took was a struggle. The air felt like ice in her lungs. Milo's body grew heavier against her, his small limbs stiffening. She began the second verse, the words clumsy with numbness. Her mind drifted. She remembered sunlight on the red grasses of home, the scent of night-blooming tira flowers, the way Milo laughed when she carried him on her shoulders. None of that existed here. Only the snow and the wind and the weight of his small, still body. The snow fell without end, a white shroud burying them slowly. She could no longer feel the rocks beneath her knees. Her back ached from the effort of staying upright, but she refused to lie down. To lie down was to accept it. Instead, she curved her body over his, making a shelter of herself. Her claws, usually sharp and ready, were dull with frost. She tucked them close so they wouldn't scratch him. Then a sound broke through the storm's monotony. Not the groan of a bending tree or the whisper of driven snow, a sharp crack, clean and deliberate. It came from the forest edge, her head lifted slowly. Her eyes, sensitive to movement even in near darkness, focused. A figure emerged from between the pines. It moved with purpose, stepping through deep snow without hesitation. Human-shaped, tall, carrying a rifle slung across its back. It moved toward her, each step crunching in the snow. She could see the outline of its hood, the bulk of its winter gear, the way its breath plumed in the freezing air. Her body tightened. One arm held Milo, the other hand flexed, claws extending slowly, ready. The song died in her throat. This was not how she thought the end would come. The figure paused about 20 paces away. It stood watching. The wind ripped at its coat. The rifle remained on its back. It did not raise a weapon. It did not speak. It simply stood there, a dark shape in a world of white, looking at the alien mother and her dying child. Terran saw them through the storm's haze, two figures half buried in snow. Their features cut through the blur, the sharp angles of the mother's face, the unnatural coppery tone of her skin, the slight ridge along the child's temple. Lamari, non-human, enemy. His training seized him. Threat assessment, finger near the trigger. Every instinct told him to retreat, to track, to report. But he hesitated. Something in the way she held the child, curved over it, shielding, not attacking, froze him where he stood. His thumb stayed clear of the safety. A memory rose unbidden. Another storm years ago, a different pair of eyes staring up from the snow. A choice made too late. The weight of that failure settled in his chest, as real as the cold on his skin. He never spoke of it. He didn't need to. It lived in his hands every time he lifted the rifle. The weapon felt different this time. Not just a tool for killing. It could be a lever, a barrier, a way to change an outcome. He made himself look again past the alien features to the reality before him. No weapons visible. No aggressive stance. Just a mother, a child, and the storm doing what his people's war had not, finishing them. He knew cold. It was a patient killer. It didn't care about species or sides. It took the weak, the exposed, the unlucky. It didn't hesitate. He'd seen it claim human and Lamari alike on this frozen frontier. The conflict between their kinds felt distant here, abstract. The storm was immediate, real, a decision formed. Not in words, but in motion. He unslung the rifle slowly, keeping his movements clear and deliberate. He held it low, angled toward the ground, finger away from the trigger. Then he began to approach. Not quickly, not silently. He let his boots crunch in the snow so she would hear him coming. When he was 10 paces away, he stopped. Her eyes were locked on him, wide, alert, afraid. He kept his voice level. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words meant nothing to her. The tone might not, but he said them anyway. Calm. Even. An offering. He shifted his weight slowly, reaching with his free hand toward the pouch on his belt. He unclipped it, fingers numb but steady. Inside was a heat pack, the kind that activated with a twist. He held it up, letting her see it. Small, gray, unthreatening. Then he bent, slowly, carefully, and placed it on the snow between them. He didn't throw it, didn't push it forward, just set it down and stepped back. His breath clouded in the air between them. The wind tore at his hood. He waited, watching her, watching the child. The risk was immense. She could lunge. She could have hidden weapons. She could signal others, but she didn't move. Her eyes flicked from his face to the heat pack, then back to his hands. The rifle remained pointed at the ground. His posture stayed open, non-threatening. Everything he'd been trained to avoid, everything that might get him killed, or might save a life. He didn't know which. He held still and waited for her choice. Words meant nothing here. They were just sounds empty on the wind. Nara watched the human take another step forward. A low hiss escaped her throat. It was not a word. It was a warning, a reflex. Her arms tightened around Milo. Her body became a wall between him and the stranger. Terran stopped immediately. He kept his hands where she could see them. One still held the rifle low. The other was empty. The small gray pack he had placed on the snow began to change. A soft glow pulsed from within it, a faint orange light that pushed back against the white of the storm. Heat. He'd given her heat. He made no move to pick it up again. He simply waited. His eyes were on hers, but his posture was turned slightly away. He was not presenting a full frontal challenge. It was a subtle thing, but she noticed. It was the posture of one who understood threat displays. Her eyes flicked from his face to the glowing pack. The snow around it had already begun to melt, creating a small dark circle. The warmth reached her, a faint promise against the brutal cold. She looked at Milo. His breathing was still shallow. His skin had a bluish tint that made her chest ache. The human's weapon remained pointed at the ground. She moved. It was slow, deliberate. Her claws were still extended, a clear thread of their own. She kept her body between the human and her son as she leaned forward. Her fingers, numb and stiff, closed around the pack. The warmth was immediate and shocking. It felt like life itself. She did not look at the human. She turned and pressed the pack against Milo's chest, tucking it under the layers of frozen hide he wore. A small sigh escaped him. It was the first good sound she'd heard in hours. Terran watched the child. He saw the labored rise and fall of its small chest. He saw the blue tinge around its lips and fingertips. Hypothermia. Advanced. He knew the signs. The shelter was not a luxury. It was the only chance. He turned his head and gestured with his chin toward the tree line. He didn't point. Pointing could be seen as aggressive. He just looked in the direction of the cabin, then back at her. Nara followed his gaze. She saw nothing but snow and trees. But she understood the meaning. Shelter. A place out of the wind. Her own instincts warred with each other. Trust a human? It was against every lesson of her life. But stay here? That was a death sentence for her son. The human had given warmth. He had not attacked. He had not taken. He had offered. She looked from the trees back to the human's face. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood, but his stance was still passive, waiting. She gave a single, sharp nod. It was the barest of agreements, a thread of trust thin as ice on a puddle. Terran nodded back. Then he turned and began to walk. He did not look back to see if she followed. He simply moved, breaking a trail through the deep snow toward the trees. His pace was steady, not fast. He knew she would be slower, burdened with the child. Nara pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were stiff and burned with cold. She shifted Milo's weight, holding him close with one arm, and began to follow the human's tracks. Each step was an effort. Each step was a decision. She watched his back, the rifle still slung there. She watched the way he moved through the storm, sure and steady. They were walking into the unknown together, a silent pact forged in snow and desperation. The only sound was the wind and the crunch of their steps. The cabin door closed. The wind scream vanished, replaced by a thick silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Warmth began to soak into their frozen limbs. It was a physical shock, a painful thawing of skin and muscle. Taran moved without hesitation. He dropped his rifle by the door and went straight to the small hearth, adding another log. The flames leapt higher. He turned to them. Nara stood just inside the door, Milo clutched to her chest. Her eyes scanned the room, the single door, the shuttered window, the shelves of supplies. Every part of her was tense. She looked like a coiled spring ready to release. Taran ignored the weapon on the floor. He kept his hands visible. He approached slowly, his movements economical. He pointed to the wet hides wrapped around Milo, then to the fire. He mimed removing them. Nara's gaze was fixed on his hands. She did not move. Taran reached into a chest near the hearth and pulled out a thick wool blanket. He held it up, showing it was empty, then laid it near the fire to warm. He came closer again. This time he pointed at Milo, then at the blanket. He made a gentle lifting motion with his hands, questioning. Nara's grip tightened. A low growl rumbled in her chest. Taran stopped. He waited. He could see the child's condition worsening. The blue tint was deeper. The breathing was still far too shallow. He pivoted. He went to a small stove where a pot of broth simmered. He dipped a metal cup into it and brought it back. He held it out. Steam rose from the surface. The smell of meat and herbs filled the space between them. Nara's eyes flicked to the cup. She did not take it. Taran set it on the floor near the blanket. He backed away, giving her space. She watched him for a long moment. Then, with movements so slow they seemed to ache, she knelt. She laid Milo on the warm blanket. Her body stayed between him and Taran. She kept one hand on her son, the other free, claws slightly extended. She picked up the cup. She sniffed it. Her nostrils flared. She did not drink. Instead, she tilted it carefully to Milo's lips. A few drops touched his mouth. He did not react. Taran picked up a small med kit from a shelf. He opened it, showing the contents: bandages, salves, a stethoscope. He approached again, this time with the open kit held before him like an offering. Nara watched, her body rigid. He knelt opposite her on the other side of Milo. The child lay between them, a small, silent boundary. Taran reached out slowly, his fingers aiming for Milo's wrist to check his pulse. Nara's hand shot out. She didn't touch him. She just blocked the path. A sharp hiss cut the air. Her teeth were bared. Taran froze. His hand hung in the space between them. He did not pull back. Instead, he shifted his hand to his own wrist. He pressed 2 fingers against the vein there. He held her gaze. He tapped his fingers lightly, mimicking the rhythm of a heartbeat. Then he pointed to Milo's wrist. He did it again. Tap, tap, tap. A universal signal, life, rhythm. He was not touching. He was teaching. Nara's eyes narrowed. She looked from his face to his wrist, then to Milo's. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. She gave a single, curt nod. Permission. Taran moved his hand again with that same slow deliberation. This time, when his fingers touched the cold skin of Milo's wrist, she did not stop him. She watched. Her own hand remained ready, but she allowed it. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It was a battleground where trust was being won, inch by careful inch. A small cough broke the silence. It was a dry, weak sound like a twig snapping underfoot. It came from Milo. His body jerked with the effort. Nara lunged forward. Her hand went to his chest, her claws retracting at the last second to press against him with the pads of her fingers. Fear was a bright, sharp thing in her eyes. Every instinct told her this was a turn for the worse. Taran moved, but not with her speed. His motions were deliberate, calm. He picked up the stethoscope from the open medkit. He held the chess piece toward her so she could see the cold metal disc. He didn't try to explain. He just showed her the object, then tapped his own ear and pointed to Milo. He was mapping a connection between the tool and the act of listening. He leaned in. Nara's body stayed rigid, but she did not stop him. He placed the cold disc on Milo's chest right over his small heart. The sound that came through the earpieces was ragged. The rhythm was all wrong. It was too fast, a panicked flutter, and too shallow, like a bird trapped in a closed space. He listened for a full minute, his face giving nothing away. He moved the disc to the child's back, listening to the air moving through his small lungs. It was a wet, troubled sound. He set the stethoscope down. He didn't look at Nara. He looked at the problem. He adjusted the blankets, tucking them tighter around Milo's small form, sealing in what warmth they could. He took another heat pack from his pouch, twisted it to activate the chemical reaction, and slid it under the blankets near the boy's feet. He worked with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice in adverse conditions. Nara watched his every move. Her fear began to be replaced by a fierce, focused attention. She saw how he layered the blankets. She saw where he placed the heat. When he reached for a water skin to drip a few cool drops onto Milo's parched lips, she picked up a clean cloth from the medkit and mimicked the action. Her movements clumsy at first, then more sure. She was learning. She was adapting human methods to save her child. The divide between them, once a chasm, was now just a line they both worked on opposite sides of. Hours passed. The fire crackled and spat, consuming log after log. The wind outside continued its low, constant howl, a reminder that the world beyond the cabin walls was still a frozen hell. Inside, the only sounds were the fire and the ragged, difficult breathing of the child. Terran sat back on his heels, his own body aching with fatigue. He kept watch. Nara did not sleep. She kept her hand on Milo's chest, feeling the unsteady rhythm of his life. Then a change. The frantic, shallow breaths began to deepen. The panicked pace slowed, evening out into a steadier, stronger rhythm. The blue tint around Milo's lips and fingertips began to fade, replaced by a healthier though still pale coppery tone. His small chest rose and fell in a smooth, consistent motion. Terran leaned forward again, picking up the stethoscope without asking. He listened. The wet rattle was gone. The heartbeat was stronger, steadier. Milo stirred. It was a small movement at first, just a twitch of his hand. Then his eyelids fluttered. They opened slowly, unfocused at first, blinking against the firelight. He looked up, his gaze traveling from the rough wooden ceiling above him to the face of his mother leaning over him. A small confused sound escaped him, not a cry but a question. Nara's breath caught in her throat. Her hand, which had been pressed against his chest, now moved to cup his cheek. Her thumb stroked his temple. She did not speak. She just looked at him, and for the first time since the storm began, the tightness in her shoulders truly eased. The breath of life had returned. Words were still a barrier. They had no shared sounds, no common roots. Communication happened in gestures, in looks, in the space between actions. Nara watched Terran for a long moment. The rigid alertness in her shoulders eased. The defensive hunch of her body softened by a fraction of an inch. It was a subtle shift, but in the close quiet of the cabin it was profound. She looked from his face to Milo, who was sleeping more peacefully now. Then her gaze returned to Terran. She raised one hand. She pressed her fingers to her own chest directly over her heart, a simple physical gesture. Then she moved her hand and laid it gently on Milo's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Finally, she lifted her hand and gestured toward Terran, her palm open. It was not a threat. It was an offering, an acknowledgement. She was connecting the three of them. Her life, her son's life, his role in preserving both. Terran understood. It was a language older than words. Gratitude. Recognition. He gave a single, slow nod. He pointed a finger at his own chest. Terran, he said. His voice was low, clear. He held her gaze. Then he pointed to her. It was a question. She watched him, processing. Her head tilted slightly. The sounds he'd made were strange, guttural. But the meaning was clear. Names. She pointed to herself. Nara, she said. The word had a softer tone, more melodic. Then she turned her hand and touched her son's shoulder. Milo. 2 syllables, quiet and sure. Those 3 names became their first shared ground. A tiny, fragile vocabulary built on the most fundamental thing a person owns. Terran repeated them. Nara, Milo. He said them carefully, getting the inflection as right as he could. She did not try to say his name. She just listened. And in that listening, an understanding settled between them. They were no longer just a human and a Lamari. They were Terran, Nara, and Milo. On the floor between them sat the empty metal cup. The broth was gone, consumed by Milo in slow, careful sips. Nara looked at the cup. She looked at Terran. She pointed to the cup, then pointed directly at him. It was another clear request. More. For him. Terran picked up the cup. He went to the stove and filled it from the simmering pot. The steam rose, carrying the rich scent. He brought it back and handed it to her. This time she did not test it on Milo first. She did not sniff it suspiciously. She took the cup in both hands, feeling its warmth. And then she drank. She drank it all. It was a deliberate act. She was accepting his sustenance. She was trusting that it was safe. For her. When she finished, she set the cup down. She met his eyes again. No words passed between them. None were needed. The cabin was warm. The child was alive. They had shared names and food. A silent agreement solidified in the space between them, as tangible as the fire's heat on their skin. They were no longer adversaries caught in a storm. They were allies, bound by the simple, desperate need to survive what came next. The outside world with its wars and its hatreds felt very far away. In here, there was only the pact of the saved and the saver. The warmth of the cabin was an illusion. Safety here was temporary. A soldier's instincts never truly sleep. Taran felt them stir. The immediate crisis had passed. Milo was stable. Nara was no longer poised to attack. This created space for the older, more ingrained habits to resurface. He moved to the shuttered window. He did not open it. He placed his eye against a narrow crack between the wooden slats. He scanned the tree line. He listened. The wind's pitch had changed. The relentless scream had faded to a steady, mournful groan. The snow was still falling, but it was lighter now. Less furious. This was the problem. A blizzard's violence provided cover. Its calm aftermath revealed everything. Their tracks leading from the forest edge to this door would be clear soon. A child could follow them. A professional hunter would read them like a printed page. He could already picture the deep, dragging impressions of Nara's steps, the smaller, more purposeful prints of his own. A story of desperation and rescue written in snow for anyone to find. Nara watched him. She saw the way his posture changed. The ease he'd had while tending to Milo was gone. His shoulders were set. His head moved in slow, precise arcs as he scanned the outside world through the narrow gap. She understood this language. The language of threat assessment. It was universal. Her own body responded in kind. The brief relaxation she'd allowed herself evaporating. The safety of the walls seemed to thin. The enemy was not just the cold. It was what the cold had temporarily held at bay. She rose from Milo's side. She crossed the room to where Taran stood. The floorboards were dusty. She knelt. With one sharp claw she drew in the fine layer of grime. The shape was simple, stark. A rounded helmet. Two slanted, glowing red eyes beneath the visor. She did not look up at him as she drew it. She just finished the symbol and pointed to it. Then she pointed toward the window. Toward the outside, Taran looked down. The symbol was unmistakable. Red eyes, mercenaries, not regular military. These were freelance hunters paid by the bullet or by the scalp. Their specialty was tracking and exterminating Lamari stragglers, survivors who had slipped through the front lines. They were ruthless, efficient, and expensive. Their presence this deep in the territory meant someone with significant resources wanted every last one of her people gone. He knew their reputation. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't ask questions. He looked from the symbol to her face. Her expression was grim, resigned. She knew what they were. He tried to offer reassurance, his voice low. The storm covered our tracks. We are safe for now. He knew the words were empty even as he said them. She might not understand the language, but she understood the tone. It was the tone of a man preparing for a fight he hopes to avoid. His eyes went back to the crack in the shutter. He scanned the trees again, his gaze more intent now. He was no longer looking for weather changes. He was looking for movement, for the telltale shift of a branch that wasn't caused by wind, for the gleam of optic lenses in the fading light. The risk was no longer theoretical. It had a shape. A helmet with red eyes. He turned from the window. He motioned for Nara to follow. He led her to the cabin's single door. He pointed to the hinges. Old, rusty. He pointed to the lock. Simple, weak. He showed her the frame where the wood was soft and splintered from years of weather. He was methodical, showing her every vulnerability. This was not his fortress. It was a temporary shelter with many flaws. Then he went to a wooden chest in the corner. He opened it. Inside were tools, scraps of metal, old wire. He began pulling items out. Nara watched for a moment, then joined him. She selected a length of strong, flexible wire. She pointed to the door, then mimed it snapping taut. A tripwire, he nodded. They worked without speaking. He found a metal bar to brace the door. She found nails and began sharpening their points on a stone. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It was a position to be defended. The task was shared. The enemy was common. The temporary truce forged over a sick child was hardening into something more solid, something built on the mutual understanding of a coming threat. A soldier and a refugee plan a defense with a shared vocabulary of survival. They use what's at hand. They read each other's instincts. They cover the other's blind spots. Taran knelt by the far wall of the cabin where the floor met the stone foundation. He pried up a section of planking that looked no different from the rest. Beneath it was a hatch, old and iron-ringed, set into the ground. He pulled it open. A dark, cold draft rose from below. An escape route. A cave system, he explained with gestures that ran deep under the mountain. A way out if the cabin fell. Nara moved closer. She did not simply look. She examined. Her eyes, adapted for low light, scanned the darkness below. She pointed into the shaft, then cupped her hand over her mouth and breathed out, watching the plume of her breath. She shook her head. She pointed to the fire, then mimed the heat rising. She was thinking of thermals. Their body heat, the fire's warmth. It would all rise up that shaft like a beacon to anyone scanning for signatures. She pointed to the open hatch, then made a sweeping motion to cover it. They needed to mask it, to baffle the heat and light. They worked. Taran pulled spare blankets from the chest. Nara took them. She began layering them over the open hatch, creating a loose, insulated seal that would diffuse their thermal output. It was a simple fix, but one born of a different kind of warfare. One fought with sensors and scanners, not just bullets. Her ingenuity was practical, immediate. Milo watched from his nest of blankets by the fire. His color was better. His eyes were alert. He followed their movements, his small hands mimicking the tying of knots as Nara secured the blankets. He was learning the grammar of defense before he could even walk. Taran saw him watching. He pointed to the heavy wooden door. Door, he said. He made a pushing motion against it. Safe. He pointed outside, then held up a hand in a sharp stop gesture. Danger, Nara listened. She pointed to her own ear, then tilted her head. Cathar, she said. Listen. She pointed to the shadows under the table. Sen, hide. Then she looked at Milo and her expression softened. She touched his head, then her own heart. Vala, family. The words were exchanges of trust, each one a tool for what was coming. They moved outside into the easing storm. The snow was still deep, but the wind had lost its killing edge. They worked together in the twilight. Taran set tripwires at knee height between trees, connected to empty cans filled with stones. Nara took his wire and created more subtle snares, ones that wouldn't break but would tighten, meant to entangle and delay. They crafted decoys from spare blankets and old gear, shaping them into lumpy humanoid forms and placing them in clearings away from the cabin. They scuffed false trails leading in wrong directions into dense thickets and dead ends. Back inside, they reinforced the door with a heavy crossbar Taran fashioned from a stout branch. They packed mud and snow into the cracks around the window shutters to seal out light and sound. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a carefully prepared position. Every weak point was addressed. Every asset was used. The foundation of the place was no longer just wood and stone. It was the unspoken partnership between a human soldier who knew how to hold a line and a Lamari refugee who knew the price of being hunted. They had built a fortress not just of objects but of shared purpose. The sound came first, a low mechanical whine that cut through the fading moan of the wind. It was not a natural sound. It was the buzz of a distant engine, growing louder by the second. Taran's head snapped up. His hand went out, a flat, urgent signal. Down. Nara reacted instantly. She pulled Milo from his blankets and dropped with him below the level of the window. Taran joined them on the rough wooden floor, his body a shield in front of theirs. They watched the shadow pass over the cabin. It was a black shape against the gray sky, moving with a relentless insect-like purpose. The drone was compact, armored, built for hunting. Its propulsion system created that persistent, irritating whine that set teeth on edge. It flew a slow, methodical grid pattern over the clearing. Its sensors were active. They could almost feel them, a searching pulse scanning for heat signatures, for movement, for the subtle electronic whisper of comms gear or weapons. For life, it circled their position. The sound of its engines dipped and rose as it changed course. Its shadow slid over the shutters again. Terran held his breath. He watched Nara. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, tracking the sound. Her arm was tight around Milo, who was silent and wide-eyed. The drone paused, hovered. Its nose dipped slightly, focusing on something to the east, one of their decoys. The lump of blankets and spare gear they had placed near the tree line. The drone's engines whined higher. It descended toward the false target, giving it a thorough scan. It was working. Their crude trick had drawn its attention. The drone spent a full minute inspecting the decoy, its sensors painting it with invisible light. Then, as if satisfied it was non-threatening debris, it rose back to its search altitude. It completed another pass over the cabin, but this time its movements were less focused. The heat baffle over the escape hatch was working. The layered blankets and their sealed windows were diffusing their thermal signature, making them read as ambient, as part of the background coolness of the structure itself. The drone continued its pattern, moving west, its sound fading gradually. The immediate threat had passed. But the silence it left behind was heavier than before. The warning was clear. The hunters were not relying on ground tracks alone. They had eyes in the sky. The drone's presence meant a team was nearby, using it to scout, to pinpoint targets before moving in. This was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. Terran rose to his knees. He did not stand up. He reached for his rifle where it leaned against the wall near the door. He checked the action. The slide was smooth. The magazine was full. He worked the bolt once, a soft, precise click that sounded loud in the quiet cabin. His face was set, grim. This was no longer about hiding. The drone's visit had ended that phase. The next contact would not be with a machine. It would be with the people controlling it. Nara watched him. She did not need his words to understand. She laid a sleeping Milo back in his blankets. Then she moved to her own small pack, the one she had carried through the storm. From it she drew her tools. Not a rifle, but something quieter. A blade with a curved, wicked edge, its metal dull and non-reflective. A set of sharp throwing spikes. Tools for close work. For silent work. She checked the edge of the blade with her thumb, then sheathed it again at her hip. Her movements were economical, calm. She was preparing for the kind of fight her people knew best. They did not speak. They did not look at each other. They simply prepared. Terran by the door, rifle ready. Nara by Milo, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. They listened. The only sound was the fire and the soft rhythm of the child's breathing. They were waiting. The drone's buzz was gone, but its message remained. The hunt was on. The next encounter would not be with sensors and shadows. It would be violent. It would be final. The escape route was there. The cave mouth yawned open in the floor. A promise of darkness and withdrawal. Terran could lead them down into it right now, seal the hatch above them, disappear into the mountain's cold belly. They could run. It was the smart move. The survivable move. It was what his training had always dictated. Disengage, evade, live to fight another day. But he looked at Nara. He looked at Milo, sleeping by the fire. Running meant always running. It meant never stopping. It meant Milo would grow up with the sound of pursuit in his ears, just as his mother had. It meant every shelter would be temporary. Every moment of rest would be haunted by the knowledge that it would end. Terran knew that kind of life. It wore you down to nothing. It made you less than a person. It made you pray. He made the choice. He would not run. He would stand. This cabin, with its weak door and its single window, was not a fortress. But it was a place where a child had been brought back from the edge of death. It was a place where trust had been built from nothing. That was worth defending, even temporarily, even against impossible odds. He turned from the hatch and looked at Nara. He did not need to explain. He simply shook his head and pointed to the door. Then he pointed to his rifle. We stay, we fight. Nara understood. She looked from him to Milo. Her people had been running for a long time. They were tired of being the hunted. A fierce light kindled in her eyes. She gave one sharp, decisive nod. Her hand went to the blade at her hip. She was with him. They began to prepare the ground. Terran gathered the few explosives he had, old mining charges, unstable and powerful. He set them at the tree line near the decoys, wiring them to a manual trigger he could press from the cabin window. He brought out cans of fuel for the stove, the volatile liquid sloshing inside. He placed these near the charges. They would not stop an armored vehicle, but they would make a statement. They would create fire and confusion. Nara helped. She moved with a quiet efficiency, placing sharpened stakes in the snow at angles designed to trip and impale. She used her knowledge of the terrain, setting traps where the snow was deepest, where a pursuer would be most off balance. She worked with a cold, focused anger. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about defiance. When everything was set, Terran laid it out. He used gestures, pointing, miming. He would lure the threat toward the explosive trap. He would use the fire and chaos as cover. He would aim for weak points, for vision ports, for joints. It was a simple plan: lure, trap, destroy. He then pointed to Nara, then to Milo, then to the hatch in the floor. Her role was clear: protect the child. If the fight turned, if the cabin was breached, her job was to get Milo into the cave and seal it behind them. Her survival was more important than his. They both knew it. She did not argue. She accepted the duty. They shared a look across the small room. No words passed between them. None were needed. The understanding was complete. It was in the set of his jaw, the readiness in her stance. They had come together in a storm over a dying child. They would face what came next as a unit. The cost of this decision, the price of this small piece of safety, would be paid in risk. It would be paid in pain. They were ready to pay it. The waiting was over. The next sound they heard would not be a drone. It would be the beginning. A war machine moves through a quiet forest with a terrible, deliberate violence. It does not creep or stalk. It announces itself. The sound began as a deep, rhythmic thudding that grew into a shuddering crash. Trees splintered. Limbs sheared off and fell into the snow. The ground itself seemed to tremble with each step. A pine 40 feet tall groaned and then toppled, its roots tearing from the frozen earth. The mech stepped over the wreckage. It was a monolith of blackened alloy and reinforced plating, standing 3 times the height of a man. Its design was purely functional, a brutal geometry of angles meant to deflect fire and deliver it. From its broad shoulders, weapon mounts tracked the environment with a low hydraulic whine. In the center of its torso, a wide visor glowed with a hellish red light. The light swept across the clearing, pausing on the cabin. It was a searching, intelligent gaze. The machine was not just walking. It was hunting. Terran did not wait for it to choose its angle of attack. He fired first. The crack of his rifle was a small, sharp sound against the machine's industrial roar. The round sparked off the armor plating on its left leg. It was a token hit, a scratch, but it served its purpose. The mech's visor snapped toward the source of the shot, away from the cabin door, away from Nara and Milo. The response was instantaneous. A weapon on its right arm cycled with a high-pitched whine and fired. It was not a bullet. It was a concentrated burst of plasma. It tore through the air and hit the cabin wall just below the window. Wood vaporized. A section of the wall the size of a man's torso disappeared in a shower of splinters and acrid smoke. The cabin groaned on its foundation. Terran was already moving. He broke from his cover behind a rock and ran. He did not run in a straight line. He zigzagged, using the remaining trees for cover, heading east, away from the cabin and toward the trap they had prepared. His boots pounded in the snow. His breath came in hard clouds. The mech pursued. Its gait was a loping, devastating stride. It ignored the cabin now. Its priority was the target that had engaged it. It fired again. Another plasma burst. It hit a tree just behind Terran, exploding it into flaming chunks of pulp. The concussive wave hit him in the back, shoving him forward. He stumbled, his boot catching on a root hidden under the snow. He went down hard on one knee. From the cabin window, Nara watched. She held Milo tight to her chest, her body a rigid line of tension. She saw Terran fall. She saw the mech's arm cannon swivel, taking aim at his exposed back. She saw a bolt of searing light miss him by inches, the heat of it scorching the sleeve of his coat and cooking the flesh beneath. The smell of burnt cloth and ozone filled the air even from a distance. Terran did not stay down. He pushed himself up. The pain was a white-hot brand on his arm, but he ignored it. He kept running. He was the bait now. His job was to lead the machine into the killing zone, to make it step onto the fuel cans and the hidden charges. He glanced back once. The red visor was fixed on him. The machine was following, crushing everything in its path. It was a deadly game of distance and timing, and he was losing ground with every thunderous step. The trap was just ahead. He just had to get there. Terran dove behind the rock as the massive foot of the mech came down. It planted its weight directly over the buried fuel cans and mining charges. His thumb pressed the manual trigger in his hand. The explosion was not a single sound, but a chain of them. A deep thump from the ground, then a roaring whoosh as the fuel ignited. Fire engulfed the machine's legs in a wave of orange and black. The heat hit Terran's face even from behind the rock. The smell of burning fuel and scorched metal filled the air. The mech staggered. Its left leg buckled at the knee joint, actuators screaming under the sudden stress. But it did not fall. The armor on its lower limbs was too thick, designed to withstand far worse. It caught its balance, one foot still planted in the flaming wreckage of the trap. The fire licked harmlessly at the reinforced plating. The red visor swiveled, searching for its attacker. It had taken the hit, and it was still combat-ready. Its response was immediate and violent. It could not see Terran clearly behind the rock, so it fired wildly. The plasma cannon on its arm cycled and discharged again and again. Bolts of superheated energy ripped into the surrounding trees, exploding them into shredded pulp and flame. One shot hit the rock Terran used for cover, shearing off a large chunk and sending razor-sharp fragments flying past his head. Another melted a furrow in the snow and earth just to his left, steaming and hissing. It was laying down suppressing fire, trying to flush him out or get a lucky hit. Terran used the distraction to reload. His fingers worked automatically, ejecting the spent magazine and slapping a fresh one into his rifle. The action was smooth, practiced. He ignored the chaos around him. He focused on the machine's one obvious weakness: the cockpit. Behind that red-lit visor was a human pilot. The window was small, reinforced, but it was still a vulnerability. He rose from behind the shattered rock, bringing the rifle to his shoulder. He aimed for the center of the glow. The mech saw the movement. It was already advancing again, its damaged leg moving with a jerky, limping gait. Its weapons were overheating. He could see the vents on the cannon glowing a dull orange, but they were still functional. It fired as he aimed. The shot was not a clean bolt this time. It was a wider, less focused spray of energy, a result of the overheating systems. It caught Terran low, hitting his right leg. The impact was not a clean burn. It was a concussive, shredding force. It tore through his pant leg and the flesh beneath, spinning him around and throwing him to the ground. The pain was a white-hot nova that erased all other sensation. His rifle skittered away into the snow. From the cabin window, Nara saw him fall. A raw, involuntary scream tore from her throat, a wordless warning cry that was lost in the din of the mech's engines and the crackle of fire. Terran was already moving. The world narrowed to a tunnel of pain and purpose. He pushed himself up on his elbows, dragging his injured leg. He ignored the searing agony, the feeling of warm blood soaking into his boot. His hand found the rifle. The mech was closing the distance, its heavy, limping steps shaking the ground. It raised its arm cannon, preparing a final point-blank shot. Terran rolled onto his back, bringing the rifle up. He did not have time to aim properly. He just pointed the barrel at the approaching red glow and fired. The shot was a single sharp crack. It flew straight and true, striking the center of the visor. The red light flickered violently, then went dark.